if you've got users that are used to using file shares in Windows Explorer, putting all the files in SharePoint is complete. It's not even moving the cheese, it's turning the cheese into broccoli or something.
Julie, thanks for posting the normal stuff. Love to hear from folks on the call. Some of you probably submitted these originally, so we'd love to kind of bat them around. Let's jump right into our mailbag. The team at this point. Softball starting off one, although kind of a surprisingly hard question, probably. So I think Emily, we did the drinking game where every time a SharePoint consultant says it depends, everybody takes a drink. You and I think probably should speak to this one. We've both got some history as platform owners in different types of organizations. Do you want to lead us off?
Sure. So 2 resources that we've linked here can help you with your it depends question. So the Intelligent Intranet Roles and Tasks talks about different people that can be involved. It's really important. It's not just an IT project, for example. So it lists out some different roles like communications and marketing. And then the second resource we have is around the different maturity levels, specifically for the staff and training competency. So depending on your outcome objectives with how you want to support Microsoft 365 at your organization, you'll likely be inspired by some of those different levels. In general, I feel like the 300 level is a great place to start. And in that role, we talk about having someone who can be consultative specifically. So making sure that there's someone who can help talk through strategy and help you decide what you're implementing and why at your organization at a minimum. But of course, however many people you have is going to depend a lot on your organization size, complexity of solutions, and company culture as well.
Yeah, the 50-person family-owned organization versus the 50,000-person global, publicly traded, et cetera. Pretty big difference there. But we've all been asked, like, hey, I need a SharePoint person. And then the branched questions start from there, right? Let's talk about what kind of a SharePoint person. So these are 2 great resources for answering that question. Are there follow-up questions from Chris? I wasn't sure if you had submitted this one. I didn't see who had submitted it, but are there any follow-up questions to this or follow-up discussion points?
I think it's.
Oh, sorry.
No, after you. Go ahead.
I think I've submitted a variation of this at some point before. I was looking at some of the support models for a SharePoint system and how we could kind of do that. So it's great to know that there's even more resources out there. We're starting to get into a fairly okay model, but there's always room for improvement. So thank you for sharing this.
And I don't think there's any clear and bright line about what you need to have internally as an FTE versus what you buy fractionally or outsource on a fractional basis. Like, I think you need someone in that role. You may not need a full-time person in that role. That person may need to spend 4 hours a week on that role or 4 hours a month for certain roles.
Yeah, I think the important thing is the roles. Mm-hmm. The mix of roles is really something you need regardless, 50-person private company, giant multinational. It's just how much capacity for each of those roles you need.
Yep. And I think the user, Emily, the user research and UX person, the design person, I think that's a role that you need really intensely for bursts over time, right? There tend to be inflection points in a project or the life cycle of an intranet that drive that too. It's a little burstier than some of the other things.
Definitely. On the next slide, we also have an example. I used to be a platform owner at an organization where we went from 150 people to 1,500 in 4 years. And we had self-service enabled for team sites, but not communication sites. And when we launched that, this is a little one-pager that we shared with the organization to make clear communication around what the roles of being a site owner meant and being that content owner. So we did a lot of empowerment in our organization of those different content owners and subject matter experts to be more responsible for their sites, knowing that we had such a small team. I know some organizations don't go that route and therefore they need more support. But the more that you can empower all of your site owners, the less that you're going to have to do that is day-to-day edits, for example, and you can focus more on that strategy. So I'm a big fan of self-service in organizations.
Emily, would you add community engagement to any of these responsibilities? I have an
Ooh.
obligation as a member to ask good questions. I have an obligation as an owner to help other people with similar roles to mine or similar problems to mine.
Yeah, I think that platform owner is definitely responsible for having their finger on the pulse of what's coming out, what's going on in the community. And when they're faced with a problem, not reinventing the wheel, but knowing those community resources that they can leverage to maybe get a faster solution. For example, column formatting. There's so many examples out there. I don't need to write the JSON from scratch. I can go grab what someone else has already done.
Krista, question?
Yeah, just a thought about the I guess the maintenance or the management of this. So the site owner is responsible for these types of things and monitoring the content and all that. What person has the role or who is responsible for the checking of the site activity, for example, or if the site owner is gone and nobody lets anybody know, how does that get updated? What would the who would you expect to be responsible for that area?
Sure. So I can speak to what we did at this organization specifically. We had a minimum of 2 site owners per site. So they were responsible for covering each other when they were out of office. Ideally, they were responsible for covering when they transitioned away from the company, but that definitely did not always happen. I had monthly reporting from ShareGate on sites without owners, so I could at least catch it very fast and see, okay, this site doesn't have an owner, this wasn't transitioned, and then I would be kind of like the last catch to make sure that everyone owned the different sites. So I'd say from a very high level, that platform owner should have a good understanding of what's in their environment and be monitoring that at all times.
Okay, great, thank you. I have started looking at ShareGate. We don't have it in place yet, but I've heard good things about it. So it's good to know what it can do and what kind of reports it can provide. That's great. Thank you, Emily.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of ShareGate. There's a lot of custom reports that you can make. I'd say the limitation that you'll hit, some things that we wanted were like reports on that you'd get more from the audit log on visibility and what people were consuming, and that you can't necessarily do with ShareGate, but ShareGate does a great job when you want to kind of know the structure and content and owners, things like that across your environment.
Perfect, thank you.
And Emily, in the engagement or the environment where I was working with, and Julie and Emily both worked on this too. Actually, almost everybody in the org has worked on it. It was about 30x to 40x the scale of what you're talking about, like 50 to 70,000 monthly active users, and built a custom site catalog with some automation in it for identifying owners who have left the organization, et cetera. Like we were just getting to that point of maturity in building that out, building some automation. But we used tygraph extensively for site owner analytics. So who's coming to my site? Where are they coming from? What are they engaging with, et cetera. So tygraph has some really useful analytics for us that we made great use of there from a governance and governance automation point of view. So if your scale justifies that, or your use case does, that's a great play too. Let's keep going.
I think, yeah, the important thing there, I think, is to know what you're measuring and why, right? Mm-hmm. Like the 2 site owners is because you want to make sure that the site doesn't languish and that somebody's responsible for it. You know, sometimes you get asked for metrics that may or may not make sense, like how many people have visited this page in the last 6 months. You want to make sure that you understand what you're measuring and what it indicates, what outcome it tells you about, so that you're measuring the right stuff.
Yeah, for us, we had self-service site creation enabled for both team sites and communication sites in a 50,000 monthly active user environment. So a lot of sites got built and then orphaned very quickly or thrown away, and we wanted to scrub those out to keep the integrity of search results, people's user experiences, et cetera. Well, it was in line with our governance. All right, let's talk about task planning. Here's the question. Do I have tasks from diverse SharePoint plans, sites, or plans? How do I roll them up? What's the best way to track tasks that is planner dead?
So the next slide gives us a good view overall of what some of this task management landscape is like. We've seen a lot in the past couple of years when it comes to integration. So for example, we've seen your personal task tracking in To-Do now shows with your team task tracking from Planner in teams where you can view both of those at the same time. So I definitely think it's an it depends conversation depending on your outcome objectives and a lot of your company culture as well. I know this became a question for the organization that I worked at previously where we weren't sure. There were so many different teams, so many different cross-functional projects. Everyone was tracking action items differently. As an enterprise, do we want to do it all the same? Or are we going to empower each of these different working groups to pick out what they want to use that best supports them on that level? I've not had experience with an organization committing to enterprise task management. What I've seen the most across all organizations is having this suite of tools and then letting people make a choice based on the use case.
Emily, what does the blue chevron represent?
Power Automate. Yeah.
Got it.
So
okay.
You can do that with Power Automate. If you go into the next slide, that one in general is what I have found people are using for the different type of tools. So for individual, people are using Outlook tasks, they're using To-Do. Some people are using the To-Do tags in OneNote, which is not related to the actual app To-Do, even though they're the same name. Some people use Excel lists, right? As a team, we have Planner out of the box. We have Excel, which people still use all of the time, which blows my mind because I think Planner or SharePoint lists are better. And I know that Derek and I worked on a project where Planner didn't necessarily have the customizations that we wanted. So we actually moved forward with SharePoint lists and a modern PnP search web part to centralize them from all those locations. And I think Derek can do a better job than me describing that solution and why we went with that. But he's on mute, so it'll be a mystery.
Well played.
Well played. Yeah, so we had a solution where we basically had 50 or 100 different sites, and the administrator needed to see what tasks had been completed and what hadn't. And so by leveraging a SharePoint list with the content type gallery, we could create a searchable, sort of corpus of lists and then or data, and then select which ones in the PnP search results hadn't been completed yet, because they didn't actually care whether or not they had been. They cared that the task had been completed, but when they looked for them, they only wanted to see the ones that were incomplete, so they didn't have to sift through. So we really gave them the solution that let them sort of funnel in directly on the information that they needed, and then go and follow up on those tasks. We also built integration using Power Automate as well to help them track down things and store documents and all that kind of stuff that were related to those individual tasks.
And I think that one was a good example, right, where they needed the exact same task list across a bunch of different groups, and there was continual usage of that year after year, and they needed a roll-up across all of those, and Planner doesn't offer that, right? So that was one of the primary things that we were solving for.
Yeah, we did that with one other client, and one of the reasons that we did it was the shape of what they thought of as a task was very different than sort of a typical task. The information that they wanted to track and the fields that they wanted in the task was different than what Microsoft thought of as a task. So we built a content type and put them in the, proliferated that across a bunch of sites, and we're able to do the PnP modern search thing.
Emily, the other two enterprise apps besides Project?
Dynamics 365 and Azure DevOps.
Awesome. You passed the test.
I mean, I did put it in the notes of the slide, so spoiler alert.
Cool. Awesome.
It's a good test, though.
Like, actually, yeah.
It's a good test to have the sea of icons and see if you can name them all.
That icon.
It gets tough.
That's pretty dork, man. That's pretty dork. And also, to Julie's point, I think about Power Automate, it's a note we have struck many times before, right? Making sure you understand the limitations of Power Automate and scaling a solution, making a solution more durable, etc. So Julie's got, I know, strong opinions about that, as well as I think the challenges with respect to the Planner API. Yeah, you're just gonna, okay. Julie, blink if Microsoft has you hostage, Julie. All right, let's keep going. So some resources there. A great article by Lorian about Planner. Controversial, I would say. I'm not sure I agree with every aspect of it, but it's really good stuff and thought-provoking stuff. All right, I think this one comes to Mark, is the inability to add this new version if the file already exists at the destination and issue.
Right. So this is about being able to copy a file from where it currently lives into a destination. So in the toolbar, you can select a file or files in a library or document, depending on how you look at it, and you can use the copy to option in the toolbar to take a copy and put it somewhere else. So what happens when that same file name exists in the destination? The error you get, or it's red, so it feels like an error on the left side, is a file with this name already exists. Would you like to replace the existing one or rename it and keep them both? Notice that the words on the button don't match the words in the question. I've been having an ongoing dialogue with the team that owns this, and they just don't get the problem. So what happens is if you say keep both, you end up with 2 copies of the file, or the old one is still there, and then the new one gets a 1 or a 2 or a 3, depending on how many numbers you have there. So they're actually separate files, which I can't think of an instance when you'd actually want that, but that's one of the options. And then if you do replace, you actually get version 1 of that thing. In other words, it does a delete of the current object and copies in the one that you've asked to copy. So the third option is the one that's missing, which is copy this over as a new version on top of the one that's already there. And that becomes a problem if that's what you want. It's just not an option. The only way that you can solve that problem is you can download that file and then go and upload it into the location where you want to make the change. Though I think you probably get a message that looks very similar to this one as well. So it's not a great little corner to try to get yourself out of. So there's no good answer. It's the way it works. If you think that this is something that is not doing what you need, I would suggest that you use the SharePoint feedback mechanism, and I'm sure one of my smart colleagues will be dropping that into the chat and suggest it as an enhancement.
So Mark, is our assertion that there should be an append as new version dialogue there, option in that dialogue?
Yeah, I'm in wording TBD, but yes, it feels like there should be a third option. Yep. And yeah, add as a version to the existing file, I think is.
You could also write a customization to do it.
Sure.
As a command set item.
Yeah, or even
Sure.
If the replace just did that and created it as a new version, because then if the replace did that, and you're like, oh no, that's not what I meant to do, then you could just go back to the previous
Roll
version.
back to your prior.
The other.
Yep.
Yeah, so that would, in my head, that's how that would work.
Anybody anybody in the audience with any other questions on that? I know it's kind of a, hey, it is what it is. Here's how it works, and here's how it doesn't work, and here's how we petition to have it changed. But are there any other questions or clarifying or follow up on that?
What about the move operation?
What about moving it instead of copying it?
Yeah, on the destination, you have the exact same scenario, right? The difference is that from the source, it would be deleted once you successfully copy it. So in essence, it's the same issue.
So the move actually does move older versions, whereas the copy does not.
Right, but it doesn't change the answer at the other end.
Okay.
I think it's, yeah, but I also think that depends on where you're moving it to. I haven't tested this in a while, so tell me if I'm wrong. I think if you're moving it within the same site, you get all the versions in the destination. And I think if you move from one site to another, you don't. Is that not the case?
I think that's not the case.
Okay. That would be good if that's not the case.
All right. So is that something we'll test and kind of post here
Sure.
in the channel? That'd be good. Thanks, Marcel. Good to hear from you again. All right. The Todd Show is on. Let's talk about.
I wore my special Todd Show shirt and everything.
That's it. Let's talk about adding a shortcut to OneDrive and the challenges with syncing.
Yeah, this one came in, and this one we kind of talked around in the background. And this could almost be like its own episode of Ask Sympraxis because there's just all kinds of little corners and all that. So what this is inside of a SharePoint document library, or inside of a folder somewhere. There's the little button in the menu bar up there that says add to OneDrive or add shortcut to OneDrive or something. I forget. And so that gets confusing because you can already sync that folder and you can sync OneDrive. And what's the purpose of adding the shortcut? Is this like chocolate and peanut butter? Are they better together? So the first thing that I want to say is it's complicated, and it gets complicated around syncing. So if you're planning on rolling this out to your organization, play with a couple of these scenarios that I'm going to talk about. But the long story short, the real thing where the problems come in is if you're syncing your OneDrive, and I assume 100% of people are syncing OneDrive, and you sync the location that the shortcut in OneDrive comes from, then SharePoint and OneDrive get very confused. And depending on what order and where the moon's at, and if Mars is in retrograde and all that, you get different errors and crazy things. So if you start getting, if you have somebody that's using this and they get some weird error that makes no sense, likely the first thing to check is if that user is syncing the SharePoint library and the shortcut. And the best way to undo that is to remove that shortcut and then figure out the syncing thing. Our friend Greg Zelfons has a great couple of blog posts on this, and I should have thrown those in there. I'll throw them in the chat here after I get done. And he walks through all the different scenarios and what goes wrong and what works well. I actually don't use this much. I've not found a good use for it yet. But we've gotten this question a couple of times. So some of you folks out there are a little braver than I am.
A shout out to Greg Zelfon, the other Greg Z.
There are a couple benefits that have occurred to me since we started talking about this to the shortcut in OneDrive. It gives you a place to manage those shortcuts that's in the browser instead of in the weird settings that OneDrive gives you on your desktop to manage sync endpoints. It's a better UI, I think, for end users and actually even for me, because I think that if you wanted to stop syncing something using the settings in the system tray is a little bit clunky. The other thing is that everything is in one sort of endpoint in your file explorer that somehow can feel a little bit more coherent, though that's a matter of opinion probably. So I think this will appeal to some people and not appeal to others, but for each person, they should pick one or the other as sort of their predominant way of syncing things so that they don't have a problem. And that's probably where the help desk is going to get all the calls, is where there's a mix.
Thanks, Mark. Let's keep going with Todd. And Todd, this is the classic. Let's put 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. You get 2 minutes on best practices about file share migration into SharePoint.
Yeah, this is not fair at all. So people have been asking about how to do file shares into SharePoint. And I'll be honest, like the bulk of the customers I'm working with this very minute, this is the scenario. So this is the wave that we're in now. So I've got a lot of things to share and apparently like 100 seconds left to talk about it. So my first advice is, of course, do it. Get your stuff out of those file shares, get them in SharePoint. You'll be happy when you do. An overarching rule that I've been saying for 20 years about SharePoint migrations: don't migrate crap. So this is a good time to look at that file share. That file share is legitimately 20, 30 years old now. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So part of the process is a culling process, and make sure you're not just pulling that file share over in mass, or you're not pulling over stuff you don't need. The big thing you're going to have to spend a lot of time on is information architecture, because we store data very differently in file shares than we do in SharePoint. And that's permissions and sites, that's folders versus metadata, that's file names, all these kind of things. So making that change is very important, because then once you make that infrastructure change, then you'll be able to take advantage of great things inside of SharePoint. Search will work better and those kind of things. And then the other thing that you'll spend all of your time on is educating your users, because if you've got users that are used to using file shares in Windows Explorer, putting all the files in SharePoint is complete. It's not even moving the cheese; it's turning the cheese into broccoli or something. So you're just going to have to be very patient with them and walk them through it and answer the same question 6, 8 times, maybe even from the same person, because it is just such a big difference in how they're used to working. And so as I've been talking to customers about that, I'm like, you're gonna get a bunch of customers, your users yelling at you, but that's, yeah, it's a big change. So that, and I guess another one, part of the information architecture, get rid of folders as best you can, use metadata, because in file shares, folders were really the only way we could break data up. And so now we can use columns and metadata and all that to do it. Thank you for the picture.
I think the biggest mistake that we see, Todd, and you and I are always trying to convince people not to do it, is to just lift up the file share and drop it into a document library.
Yeah.
Because then you're moving people's cheese, but you're not giving them any better tasting cheese. It's just a different UI that doesn't give them any benefit. So that's where the information architecture piece really matters.
And it's so tough. It is such a big change for folks. It is so tough.
All right, so cheese and broccoli, we're definitely making people hungry for lunch. I think the news article Rollup, I think, Emily, this is one that you have, and I do believe it's like a 1-minute answer.
Yeah, even less. So the situation is there's a news web part on a hub site, and you want to select all sites in this hub, and you want it to roll up from a child hub or the sites associated to a child hub. Neither works. So I do not believe this is as intended. It's been reported to Microsoft, but I don't have any data on when it will be fixed. But essentially, the news web part was made before child hubs came out. So my prediction is that there's just some kind of setting on that news web part where it says if it's a hub equals yes, like don't show it here. So the manual workaround is do selected sites and manually select each site. Shouldn't be too bad because you're just doing this one time. It's not something you'll have to be continually changing.
Nailed it. 3 minutes left. Can open the floor up if there are any other kind of ask me anything type questions. I think that depletes the mailbag stuff that we had. We know we could do a deeper dive on this stuff, but we'll open the floor for the couple minutes we have remaining, and I'll pop up the where we'll be next, etc. slide. So Krista, go ahead.
What's the coolest feature coming out soon, allegedly, that you guys are most excited about with relation to SharePoint?
I wish I had an immediate answer. I feel like there haven't been super exciting SharePoint announcements, but I'm hoping that maybe they're coming soon.
What that means is that it's the wave is going out and the conference. Ignite is coming.
Yeah, I'm
right?
hoping, right?
Microsoft gets so quiet before these giant conferences. It's their thing.
I can say that the SharePoint framework just released the ability to allow you to customize the new edit and view forms. I don't love how they implemented it in that you get a whole new page. So it's not unlike the way you edit an item in SharePoint right now, where you have a side panel that gives you that edit experience. This is a full page experience, and I'm not a super big fan of that. But the fact that they did actually give you the ability to create custom forms in the SharePoint framework and then associate those forms with the new edit and view links of a content type is a pretty cool way that they're just moving forward in. I wouldn't use them for that reason. I have a better way for me personally to do that gives you that side panel experience, but the fact that they're doing it is a really good thing. So I'd say that.
Greg's question, Derek, this is probably right in your wheelhouse. Adaptive cards just for devs? Question mark.
No, they're not just for devs. They're meant, for devs, but also for sort of I'm going to say low code developers, because you do need to know JSON. I could probably do a deeper dive into adaptive cards
There is a
you know,
way
in
in the
an-
dashboard, right, Derek, to create to as a low code person to put an adaptive card in the dashboard. You don't have
Yeah.
a lot of power with it, but you can do it. So that's
if you're using Viva Connections and you're using the dashboard, you can use the adaptive card designer, and you can create everything you want right there in the designer, and then load it right in using the card designer ACE, adaptive card extension. So
Yep.
Maybe a future topic as
Maybe.
adaptive cards and Viva Connections
Yeah.
continue to evolve. I know a bunch of us have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, 2 weeks from today, making your intranet multilingual. I'll be leading that one as a preview of stuff we're going to do at Collab Days New England and a case study there. Be prepared to speak multilingual if you wish in 2 weeks. Otherwise, I'm going to let you get back to your day. Thanks everybody for sharing. If you're on the East Coast, your lunch hour with us for other components. Thanks a lot.
Or if
And
you're
we'll
in
talk in 2
Iceland,
weeks.
your day is over.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.